This is episode 76 with Dave Combs. And I found this episode to be particularly heartwarming and touching because Dave is such a fantastic storyteller. And he tells the story of how, sort of by accident, he became a musical composer and finally, in the end, creating a whole bunch of musical albums that are very popular. So, the thing that I love about our conversation is that Dave was creating just for himself. He wasn't trying to make his artwork go viral. He just wanted to please himself. And then when other people started to hear his work and love it too, that was just a bonus to him. And I know that a lot of creative people, myself included, think about who is my audience? Will they like my work? But really, creating just for yourself might be the answer for those of us who want to leave a living legacy. So I hope you enjoy my conversation with Dave. It starts kind of in the middle because he's a storyteller, and we got to talking and I almost forgot to start recording. So please enjoy. Welcome to Story Power, a bi-monthly podcast where my guests and I geek out about the stories we're passionate about in all different genres, styles, and formats. My name is Lucinda Sage-Midgorden, and I started this podcast in the summer of 2020 at the beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic. As I watched the reaction of my friends, family, and social media circle, I noticed that many people turned to stories for comfort and help in making sense of the craziness going on around them. My goal was to do the same for my listeners, but as I chatted with my guests throughout the first year, I discovered that their personal stories were the most fascinating thing about each episode. Neil Gaiman says, "Fairy tales are more than true not because they tell us that dragons exist, but because they tell us that dragons can be beaten." I now know that sharing our experiences with others helps us defeat our own dragons. It is our stories that connect us to one another. Let's see what wisdom today's guest has to share with us.
Well, tell me where you are in Arizona.
I'm in Cochise County, the southeast corner of the state.
Okay.
I don't know if you know where Fort Huachuca is. It's the intelligence center for all the military. It's in Sierra Vista, south of Tucson, about an hour and a half. And then there's Bisbee, Arizona, Tombstone, Arizona is there. Cochise Stronghold, the Coronado National Memorial is here.
Mm-hmm.
We live kind of equidistant between Bisbee, which was a big copper mining town.
Okay. All right.
Now it's an artist community. There's this huge hole in the ground where the mine used to be. And Sierra Vista is mostly the Fort Huachuca, but there's also other like contractors, military contractors and stuff.
Sure.
There.
My only experience is we went to a wedding one time in Scottsdale.
Oh, hot.
Or in Phoenix, in Scottsdale, an area. So we flew into Phoenix, and that's where I have a wonderful story where I got to meet my musical hero, John W. Peterson.
Oh, wow.
Who he had retired, and his they had moved to Scottsdale, Arizona, into a retirement a gated community, and he is a songwriter extraordinaire. He had written thousands of songs. He had composed cantatas that most churches had performed. I had performed and directed several of his cantatas in my choirs that I had directed. And so and I loved his song. I still love his songs. And he just was an inspiration to me from the time I was a kid. And just his music was just perfect for what I was envisioned as something that I loved. And so to meet him in person and to actually be invited into his home, my wife and I were invited to visit with him and his wife in their home in Scottsdale.
Oh, nice.
what a privilege. He was a gentle man. He was a big, tall fella, very gentle, soft voice, but he invited me to play Rachel's song, my music, on his piano in his living room, and so I never will forget that privilege of playing my music for him in his living room. And he was so gracious, and gosh, and of course he passed away, I think about 10 years after that, but what a loss for the world. But his music lives on forever. It's just, it certainly will in my heart.
Yes. Now I'm going to introduce you to the show. Then I'm going to cut that out and put it at the beginning because I love that story and I'm going to keep it in. So today my guest is Dave Combs. And Dave, you are going to be episode 76. This episode doesn't air until 2023, but I may use some of it on my Patreon page.
Okay.
Sooner than that. Yeah. Because all these creative people that I talk to, I want to, I don't want them to wait for a year. So I'm putting them up on my Patreon page. But Dave, I love the story that you were telling about now what was his name again? Your hero.
He was my musical hero, John W. Peterson. Peterson, John W. Peterson. And most anybody in church music, certainly throughout the Midwest, would know of John W. Peterson. He wrote tons of cantatas, Night of Miracles, King of Kings, and it just went on and on. Easter cantatas, Christmas cantatas, beautiful compositions.
Oh, that's so great. And isn't it nice when you meet your hero and they turn out to be really great?
Oh, it's just, and most of the time that is the case. I think most people would tell you that all these famous people that are, they're almost bigger than life until when you meet them, they're just ordinary people that have done extraordinary things. And most of them are just wonderful people and great to get to know and so gracious. And for example, the Letterman, I got to meet the Letterman. We can talk about that at some point. I was invited to do a concert in St. Louis along with the Letterman and the Association and Don McLean and George Benson and me.
Oh, cool.
It was a radio station sponsored outdoor free concert. They invited all their most popular artists, and I was so blessed I was one of the 5 winners of that contest from their listeners. But during that process, my wife and I got to know the Letterman. The 3 gentlemen that were the Letterman, Tony Butala and the other 2 members. And because we were performing on the same stage, I was first, then they followed me, and we signed autographs side by side for 4 hours. And every opportunity we've had to get to go to hear the Letterman sing, and they still perform, we'll drive to Myrtle Beach, South Carolina to hear them anytime we have an opportunity. And it's like a homecoming. We'll get together and they remember the St. Louis concert. This was 1989 when that took place. They still remember it.
Oh, wow. That's so great. I love it.
Yeah.
Well, and isn't it great that, because you said that Mr. Peterson died, 10 years after you met him, but isn't it great that creators' artwork or music or books just live on past them? Isn't that fantastic?
It's quite a legacy, isn't it?
It is. Yes. Because if they didn't, I would never have been introduced to Jane Austen or Charles Dickens or Wilkie Collins or, any of those from the 18th century, or no, they're 19th century, authors like that. So, or even authors who are more modern who have died, but we still have their books. And we still have Van Gogh's. My husband and I took a trip around the world, and we went to the Van Gogh Museum and saw paintings there. And we went to a lot of museums in Paris. We went to a couple in Paris. And the Louvre had a strike right after we paid for our tickets. So we only got to see a certain amount of artwork there. But they have a lot of museums, Paris does. And so it's so, and architecture too, because we got to see Notre Dame and that was in 1996. So it was the choir was singing when we went in there, and there were all these tourists, but they were really quiet because the choir was singing. It was
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
practicing, you know.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it was just, so there's so many beautiful, not just nature, but beautiful artwork that's created that just lives on and on. So now I want to know more about Rachel's song because I looked at Podmatch and found out some things about you. So tell about Rachel's song, and then is that do you still write music and?
Well, Rachel's song was the very first song that I ever wrote.
Mm-hmm.
And Lucinda, I was 33 years old when I wrote Rachel's song. So for 32 years, I had never written a song.
Mm-hmm.
I'd been around music all my life, born into a family that loved music, played the piano, learned to play the piano and all this. I was a choir director, church pianist, and done all those kind of things, playing other people's music. Love music, almost all kinds of music. But I had never been told, Dave Combs, you could write your own music. I don't know why. It's always been a puzzle to me. Nobody ever told me that. I wish, my eighth grade teacher, Ms. Moore, why didn't you tell me I could write music? My high school guy, my Uncle Pat, who was our Mr. Holland's Opus kind of person. Uncle Pat, why? If he were alive today, I'd say, Uncle Pat, why didn't you tell me I could write music? And he'd probably chuckle and say, well, Dave, we had other things that we were working on. But anyway. So I was 33 years old before I wrote my first song, and I didn't even sit down to write music. I sat down at my piano one evening after work just to relax. That's the way I relax, is to sit at the piano and play. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. I sat down and I played this song. I didn't even think of it as writing a song. I didn't even think about it. I sat down, put my fingers on the keyboard in the key of C and started playing. And this song is what I played. Mm-hmm. And I played it from beginning to end, had a verse and a chorus. I love the way it sounded. It sounded great on my little baby grand piano. Mm-hmm. And that was it. I didn't even make a note I didn't write it down. I didn't even attempt it. Mm-hmm. And a couple of days later, my wife, Linda, comes home from work and she says, Dave, what is the name of this tune that I've been humming in my head all day long? You know how you get an earworm, you get a song stuck in your head. And so she hummed a little bit of it. And I said, well, it doesn't have a name. And she says, well, what do you mean? You play it on the piano all the time. I said, well, it's just something that I made up. It's something I'm playing. And she says, really? You wrote that? I said, well, I guess you could call it that. And so she said, well, have you written it down? Well, no, I've got it up here in my head. I'm not going to forget it. She said, nope, that's not good enough. Said something might happen to you and that song would be gone because I could never remember it. So she said, you got to write it down. So I said, okay, yes, ma'am, I will. So I went and got me a piece of musical manuscript. I had some, I always have some laying around, and I wrote it down. And this I'm holding in my hands. For those of you that are watching this video instead of hearing it, I'm holding in my hands. This is that original song that I wrote down. You notice it doesn't even have a name. It's just got copyright David M. Combs, 1981. This was in January of 81. And it's just got a simple melody with the chords, C, A minor, D minor ninth, D minor seventh, and then on down G7 and so forth. And a chorus down here at the bottom that starts F and then F minor and then C and blah, blah, blah. So that's a very simple melody. That's it. That's the song. So I wrote that down, put it in my piano bench. Okay, everybody's happy. I would play that song. We tried to come up with a name for it. Nothing that we came up with didn't seem to fit the song.
Right.
2 years later, some good friends of ours have a little baby girl named Rachel. And they asked me and Linda her parents asked us to be her godparents. Uh-huh. And so at her christening service in a little country church, and it was on a Saturday with just us and the family and the minister, we're at her christening service. Uh-huh. And up at the front of the church, in the middle of the platform, is a baby grand piano. So we're sitting there in the pews listening to all the service, the formal part of the service. Mm-hmm. And you know that my eyes are always going to look, catching that glimpse of the piano. Mm-hmm. Well, toward the end of the formal part of the service, I punched Linda and I said, hey, what if I played this tune now as on the piano as part of this service? What do you think? He had a great idea. So the minister finished all the formal part. I went up to the minister and the family. I said, would it be okay if I played a special tune on the piano now? And they said, well, sure. So everybody sat back down. I walked over to the piano and I sat down and started to play. And I played this song. And as I got into it, I got into the chorus, F. And then when I get to the F minor part, I hear this clearing their throat and sniffles. And you know, the tears are starting to come out of my eyes as well. It's a very sweet service anyway, with a beautiful little baby girl. They're always precious. And so I was very emotional. And at the end of the song, the sound was still dying away on the piano. And I looked over at little Rachel in her mother's arms. And I said, from now on, this song will be called Rachel's Song in her honor. And Lucinda, that's how it got its name. And so it was the perfect fit for the song. And it's still to this day, it's the perfect name for that tune.
That is fantastic. I love that story.
But that was how Rachel's Song got its beginning and got its name anyway. That was in 1983. Well, the rest of the story, as Paul Harvey would say, is that I got it recorded as a demo recording in Nashville, Tennessee. I was working with AT&T at the time and doing a lot of traveling. One of the places I was working at the time during the week was in Nashville, Tennessee. Well, Nashville, Tennessee, as you know, is called Music City, USA. And it lives up to its reputation. Everything there is around music usually. And so Linda says, why don't you get a professional demo recording made of Rachel's Song while you're in Nashville, get a studio and a musician, and let's get a recording made and that we can enjoy and keep. And I had no idea what that would entail, but I knew I could probably find somebody there that would do it with all that many studios and musicians. So sure enough, one evening I'm driving around, this is after work, I'm driving around downtown Nashville in a part of town that they call Music Square. If you visit Nashville, it's the area where the Country Music Hall of Fame and BMI headquarters, ASCAP headquarters. So it's everything in those two square blocks has to do with music. There's the old RCA recording studios that you can actually go in and tour and see a real recording studio, or where a lot of history was made. And so I'm driving down this one side street in Music Square, and it's called Roy Acuff Place. If you look it up on a Google map or whatever, it's a little side street, and it was named after Roy Acuff, a very famous, much-loved musician in Nashville. And down at the end of Roy Acuff Place, you picture this big building that looked like a barn. It had a barn-shaped roof. It's a big building. And on the corner of the street, it had this great big water wheel. They had literally moved a water wheel from an old mill to right here. And on the side of the building, it said, the Music Mill. And I thought, wow, what a clever name for this, and a water wheel out front. I said, great. Okay, so I pulled in the driveway, in the parking lot, and I looked through the glass door, and sure enough, there was a man sitting at a desk in the lobby. I thought, okay, now this is about 6 o'clock at night. You know, most places were closed, I thought. So I thought, wow, I'm lucky. I found somebody, a live person I can talk to. So I knocked on the door, and he came over and unlocked the door, and he opened it, and he says, hello, I'm George Clinton. Can I help you? And I said, I told him what I was looking for. I was looking for a studio. Now, this is not the George Clinton that probably immediately went to your mind. There's a lot of George Clintons around, but this is a recording engineer in Nashville whose name was George Clinton. Very much loved recording engineer. When he passed away about 5 years ago or so, they did a full page spread on him in the Nashville newspaper. He was that well loved by that community. Anyway, George Clinton and I met that night, and I told him what I was looking for, a studio, and he said, well, come on in. And he invited me in, and I'm in this big 2-story lobby, and over here on my left is a big life-size picture of Glenn Campbell. He'd obviously recorded there. Okay. And here in front of me is a big life-size picture, a big panorama picture of the group Alabama.
Oh, yeah.
And they're, I love Alabama's music. And they have recorded here. Mm-hmm. And over here's the Forrester sisters, and the walls were lined with gold records and platinum records. And obviously, this was a classy place. So I told George, I said, well, I've never been in a studio in my life. And he said, well, there's nobody recording right now. Why don't I take you on a tour? So he said, let's go over into Studio A, the big studio. So we go into this big room where the musicians set up. And it was a huge room. You could literally put an orchestra in this room. Oh. It was a big, big room. Uh-huh. And over in the back corner was this big 9-foot black grand piano. And, there was glass enclosed rooms around the wall. And it was quite an impressive room. He says, well, let's go into the control room. So he goes over to this door, and this is a soundproof door to go into the control room. And it's about, 6-8 inches thick. And you open it up, and it's heavy. So we go into this big room. First thing I see is the console. Now, if you've seen pictures of consoles in studios, this one looked like it was about 8 feet long. I later learned it had like 32 tracks. It was a big, impressive piece of recording equipment, sliders and knobs and switches and cables, and it was really something. And then around the wall were these recording machines. They had physical tape machines and digital tape recorders, and over the big glass window where you could look out into the room where the musicians were, big studio monitor speakers where it would just sound, perfectly sound. And I said, George, how much does this place cost to rent? And he says, oh, it's $125 an hour plus engineer. And I thought, oh, I can't afford that. And he said, well, you don't worry about it. He said, the fellow who owns this studio owns a tiny little studio across the street in a former little rent house, two-bedroom rent house. They converted it into a studio. And he said, it's got a baby grand piano and a small control room, perfect for what you need. And it's $15 an hour plus engineer.
Oh, that's so cool.
Okay, thank goodness I can afford that. And so, and by the way, this was 1986. So $125 then, in today's dollars with inflation the way it is right now, it would be over $500 an hour to rent this. So you can imagine that that's more than you pay, almost what you'd pay for a lawyer or some expensive professional. So I thought, I can do that. Okay, George, now that all I need a musician that can play this song for me. And he thought for a second. He said, hey, I know just the right person. His name is Gary Prim. He said, I've known Gary forever. We go to church together, and he's a great piano player and would do a great job for you. He said, let's go back to my desk and I'll look up his phone number, which he did, and wrote it down on a piece of paper and gave it to me. Well, I took that little piece of paper, jumped back to my rental car, and I hightailed it back to my hotel room near the airport. And you say, well, why didn't you call him on your cell phone? Well, folks, this was 1986. Cell phones hadn't even been thought about, and the internet didn't exist either for another 10 years. So I had to get a landline. So I go back to my hotel room. I call Gary Prim's number, got his answering machine. About 30 minutes, he called me back. Hi, this is Gary Prim. Can I help you? Yeah, Gary, George Clinton said you could do a good job recording my demo, a demo of a little song I've written called Rachel's Song. He said, yeah, I'd love to do that. I said, well, Gary, what do you need from me? He said, well, all I need is a recording of you playing it on the piano, so I kind of know what it sounds like. And he said, send me also a lead sheet. I said, okay, what's a lead sheet?
Really?
I didn't know the lingo of the music business in Nashville. And he says, oh, it's just the melody and the chords written out on a piece of paper. And I said, oh, I've got that. That's just the little piece of paper that I wrote the song down on to start with. I just didn't know to call it a lead sheet. So I made a copy. When I got back home, I made a copy of the lead sheet and a recording of me playing it, sent it to Gary. Well, a couple of weeks later, we'd all lined up this little studio to do the recording. It was on a Friday evening. I was having to work all through the weekend to cut over some software at the factory I was working at anyway. Mm-hmm. So I'd lined up this Friday night at 6 o'clock, August the 22nd, 1986. I'll never forget it because this is one of those nights that changed my life forever. 6 o'clock, in comes Gary into this tiny little studio, carrying under his arm his synthesizer. It's a Yamaha DX7 synthesizer. It's a little analog. I have one just like it right over here in my studio. Mm-hmm. And he brings that into the little studio, and I meet him. He's a wonderful, warm, easy to know kind of person, one of those instant friends, just easy. He and I both, turns out, are from East Tennessee. I'm from Irwin, and he's from down near Knoxville, that area. And so we're very compatible, and we both speak the same language, Southern. So anyway, I meet Gary, and he sets his synthesizer down and goes over to the piano, and he starts warming up on the piano. And I go into the little control room with the engineer, and we have a glass window where we can look through and see Gary playing the piano, and there's speakers where we can hear what's going on. So I'm in there with the engineer, and pretty soon Gary says, "Okay, I'm ready to record. Let's do it." So the engineer pushes record on the tape machine and speaks to Gary through the little speaker, says, "We're rolling," and so Gary knows, start playing. He starts playing this little baby grand piano and starts playing music, my song, Rachel's song. Now remember, Lucinda, I have never heard my song played by anybody but me. Mm-hmm. I had no idea what I was going to get. All I had asked him to do was make an arrangement of my music. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So you can imagine the surprise that is in my mind when I hear what I hear coming out of Gary's piano playing. Mm-hmm. So he starts playing, he gets mostly through the song, and he stops. He says, "I think I can do better than that." He said, "Let's rewind it. Let's start over." So we rewind the tape and back to the beginning, and he starts playing again. This time he played the song on the piano perfectly all the way through. He played the verse and the chorus twice in the key of C, and then for the third time, verse and chorus, he upped it from a half a step into the key of D flat or C sharp. And it was just a beautiful arrangement. And I thought, wow, I cannot believe what I'm hearing. And he comes in the studio, the control room, and says, "Well, what do you think, Dave?" And I said, "Oh man, that is fantastic." And if he'd have stopped right there, I would have been happy, because it's, as a piano solo, it was beautiful, absolutely beautiful. Mm-hmm. But he says, "Well, Dave," he said, "I got some other ideas how we can make this sound really, really special." He said, "What I'm thinking is, I want to play some electric piano parts for part of it to double." He called it doubling, mm-hmm. playing the exact same thing he played on the real piano mm-hmm. on the electric piano sound on the keyboard. So he said, we set that all up and record two more tracks on the recorder mm-hmm. of the electric piano sound. Well, he nailed it. When you listen to the recording of Rachel's song, and I hope everybody will when we're finished, mm-hmm. I want you to listen for this. When you can tell when the electric piano kicks in part of it, but you can't tell there is no disconnect. He nailed the notes right exactly as he'd played it on the real piano, which is amazing gift of a musician to be able to replicate what they just did on two different instruments. Mm-hmm. So he recorded the electric piano, and he said, "I think we need some bottom and some top to this recording." So I'm thinking some low strings for the bottom and some high strings like the violins for the top. Mm-hmm. So he goes, "Okay, two more tracks," and he's got the headphones on like you've got on now, and he's sitting there at the keyboard, and he's got the string sound going, and so he plays and re-record the low strings part, and then we finish that, and then two more tracks on the recorder, and he would do back up and do the high strings part wherever he wants that in there. Mm-hmm. Finish that part up, and he said, "Okay, now through parts of this in the middle," he said, "it needs a little punch." And he said, "I want to put in some horn sounds." So he flipped the synthesizer to a horn sound, two more tracks to record, sitting there, and he recorded the horn sound in the right places. And I'm in the control room listening to all this happen real time, and I am just blown away. I'm sure my mouth was open. I was in total awe of what was happening. We finish that. He comes in the control room, and the engineer fixes everything together and plays it all mixed together back so we can hear kind of what it sounds like. And Gary is sitting there listening to it, and he said, Yep, that's exactly what I imagined it would sound like, and that's good. And I said, Gary, this is more than good. This is absolutely phenomenal. I just couldn't say enough good things about it. So I wrote him a check for his agreed upon fee. He got his synthesizer and he left. And I didn't know whether I would ever see Gary Prim again in my life or not, because that was a one-off. I'd only written one song and that was it. But it turns out that that young man that walked out that door came back into my life many times. He and I went back into the studio and recorded over 170 songs over the period of 15 years, total of 14 albums worth of music that he and I have created together. And we couldn't be closer friends. We're more like family than friends. He and his wife, Julie, are just our dearest friends. Our whole family has two wonderful kids. We saw the kids grow up, and we've just grown up together, and we're still very, very close. And it's just a marvelous relationship. But that recording session, I really want people listening to this, now that I've explained this to you, I want you to when you get to my website and play Rachel's song, which is easy to do, it's all free and everything. Put your headset, put it on earbuds or headset or something, close your eyes. And now that I've described that whole recording process to you, I want you to be there in that recording room with me. And when you're listening to it, I want you to picture Gary sitting there at the keyboard or the piano playing, and me and standing in there looking through the glass window at him, observing and hearing this wonderful music being created. Because what you're hearing has never been altered, never been edited, never been remastered. You're hearing what I heard August the 22nd, 1986.
Oh, wow. That is so cool. I love it. I'm going to go back to nobody ever told you you could write a song. It sounds, and I was thinking, well, you told yourself you could write a song. You just didn't know you could. You were making it up as you were relaxing.
Mm-hmm.
It was sort of, it's just this thing where sometimes we don't acknowledge that we have these talents, and then boom, all of a sudden they show up. Or you were honing your skills all those years playing music, and then all of a sudden it turned into the song.
No, that's a really great way to look at it. It is, because I did. I had spent 32 years around music, playing and singing, and absorbing all this musical input. Right. And it all it was like putting a recipe together. You put this in, that in, and you stir it all up. And then finally, you've got the cake ready to put into the pan and bake it.
That's right. Exactly. Yes. I love that. I just love that story because, I've talked to a lot of artists, writers, authors, and visual artists, and even musicians and filmmakers. And, just hearing their process, a lot of them, though, have struggles. It's like the little voice in their head says, oh, I want to write this book, but I'm not sure I can do it. And they have to get over that hurdle. But you didn't really have that hurdle because you didn't think you were writing a song.
You're right about that.
You didn't think you were writing a song. You're just having fun playing for yourself. I love it.
But boy, did it ever change my life. That song, once the recording of the song took on a life of its own. In today's vernacular, you would say something went viral. You know how that happens, where it just kind of takes on a life of its own. Well, that's what happened with that Rachel song recording. It affected me immensely that night, but everybody that I played that song for reacted. I was amazed at their reaction. Many people were moved to tears. I didn't know why. I still don't. I don't know why for some people, they cannot listen to that song without a tear coming to their eye. And it's just the emotional connection that music kind of sparks has always been amazing. When I got back home after that recording, I had lunch with a good friend of mine who just happened to have a radio program on Saturdays of big band music. When he heard that song, he just could not believe what he was hearing. And his name is Bob Macone. He's a wonderful friend. And I respect him immensely with his deep knowledge of radio and music and big band, all that kind of thing. And he said, first time he ever heard it, his first words were, "That song will be a standard." And for somebody in the music business and as much knowledge as he had, that was a high compliment to me.
Mm-hmm.
And I had no idea whether he was just blowing smoke or whatever, but I respected what he had to say. And lo and behold, Rachel's song has become a standard. It is heard around the world, been heard millions of times. It's been played millions of times. I ended up writing out the notes that Gary had played to make sheet music so piano players, musicians could play it for themselves. It's been played in weddings and funerals and all kinds of special music at church services. It's just, the music itself has been played, playing what Gary played in the studio, but from sheet music. And it just has taken on a life of its own.
Well, how did it go viral? Did your friend play it on the radio and then other people heard it and they wanted to play it on their radio stations? How did it happen?
Well, the first time it played on that Saturday morning after I was meeting with my friend Bob, he played it that next Saturday morning on his radio show.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
And so this is WKLM radio, 94.5 in Greensboro. It was a hometown radio station. It was an easy listening format station. And when he played it, I was of course at home. My wife and I were listening to it for the very first time on the radio. I'd never heard my music played on the radio before. So I made a recording of it, of course. I still have a tape recording, a little cassette of that song, and Bob and introducing it on the radio for the very first time. Well, as soon as the song finished, in a very short period of time, my phone rings, and it's the station manager for that radio station. And he called to tell me, he said, "Dave, I've been in radio for over 20 years, managed a lot of radio stations, been around music all my life." He said, "I've never had this happen before, ever." He said, "When Bob played Rachel's song on the radio this morning, our bank of like 12 or 15 phone lines lit up. Callers calling in, wanting to know, what was that song you just played? Can you play that song again? Tell us more about Rachel's." It was just one after another. He said, "I've never had this happen." He said, "Dave, you have got to do something with this song." He said, "This is fantastic." He said, "I've never experienced this before, and this song is special. It's going to go great." I said, "Well, that is wonderful, wonderful to hear, and I'm not sure how I can do it, but I will do it." And that's when I got busy after that, contacting other easy listening FM stations around the country. And I've had, have to search around. This is before internet, before Google. So I had to find ways to get their phone numbers, contact them, and I would send them a copy of Rachel's song to play on the radio. Everyone that I sent it to put it on the radio. So it began on easy listening stations all over the whole country. And then I got it on all 400, it's 400 plus radio stations that were easy listening format. Hey, we only have maybe less than 5. I mean, I don't even know how many there are, but that format has changed. But back then, every major market had an easy listening station. And Rachel's song became on the charts, number 1 or 2 in all of the major markets around the entire country. It was that popular. They played it in rotation. WKLM in Greensboro, I promise you, played it every hour of every day, at least once. They knew that song was so popular here with the local connection anyway. They never got tired of listening to it. Every hour. Linda and I would wake up to our clock radio in the mornings, and several times I woke up to my music playing on the radio. Now,
that is so cool.
If that doesn't give you chills, nothing will. I mean, it's just when you turn on the radio and there's your own music playing. That's a message if there ever was one.
Right. Yeah. Oh, that's so great. I love it. Now, this isn't me doing this, but I wrote a novel, and one of my friends she used to live just down the road from us, but she moved to Lee's Summit, Missouri. And she said, "I went into the library and there on the end cap was your book, and I had to hug it." And she went outside the library, and the librarian took a picture of her holding my book.
Isn't that great?
It was so funny. I loved it, Yeah, it is great. It's great when people acknowledge your work, even if it's only a few people, you know.
Yep. Well,
Yeah.
in my case, it started out as a few people, but then the avalanche started. So I started getting fan mail and calls and letters from people all over the country. When they would hear the music on these easy listening radio stations, they would call the station and get the address or phone number from me and contact me. And they were really sending me notes of how much they enjoyed the music or stories of how it touched their life and that kind of thing. And so I started getting tons and tons of these fan mail letters from people. And that was what kind of led me to my music further than just on the radio. And so I got to thinking, well, I've got to write some more music, because most of them would say, okay, how can I get a copy of Rachel's song? I'd love to have an album of this music. I didn't have an album. All I had was that one song. And I thought, oh my goodness, what am I going to do? So Linda says, well, you got to sit down at the piano and you got to write some more music. I said, okay, I'll try to do this. Well, it took me a couple of years, from 86 to 88, to get enough songs to where I had written 7 songs, Rachel's song and 6 others. I said, okay, I can't wait any longer. I got to get a CD made so that these people clamoring for my music got to have something. So I went back to Nashville with Gary Prim, and we recorded these other songs as well. And I produced my first album of my music with enough music on there to be more than just one song, and started being able to sell the cassette tape and the CDs of Rachel's song. And then after that one, people said, well, when are you going to do another album? Well, I thought, well, I haven't written anything else of my own new, except it was getting close to next year, and I thought, well, why don't I do a Christmas album? I love Christmas music. So I'll take all my favorite Christmas carols. I'll send that list to Gary Prim and say, okay, here. And I had happened to write one song on my synthesizer that I call Happy Christmas Bells. And it's another song that I just played at one time. It was like Rachel's song. I didn't work at it. I just sat down and played it. Happy Christmas Bells. Well, that song is on my second album that I did, and the album is called First Christmas. So it has all these Christmas songs, plus Happy Christmas Bells that I wrote. And ironically, my father had written a Christmas song when he was a young man called King of Kings is Born. And I had Gary Prim perform an arrangement of my father's song, King of Kings is Born. So there's a family connection here with favorite Christmas carols, plus my father's song and my song on my second album called First Christmas. So that was album number 2. So now I had 2 albums that I could offer to people to play. And when you're going to come out with another one? I mean, they were never satisfied. So, okay. So here's a funny part about how do I write my music? One of the things, it has to be time at the instrument. I cannot write music unless I'm sitting at the piano. I'm not one of these people that hears it in my head and then writes it down and then go over to the piano and listen to it. I'm at the piano usually when I'm writing. And my wife knew that. So she says, okay, and we were living in Maryland at the time, and she was working in downtown DC, and I was working in Bethesda, Maryland. She said, before you go to work every morning, why don't you get up an hour early, go to the piano and sit down, and don't get up until you've at least got the beginnings of a new song. I said, okay, I can do that. And that's exactly what I did. I'd get up early. She'd be out and gone downtown before I would leave. And I would sit there and I would stay at the piano until I at least had the beginnings of a new song. Sometimes I would have a whole song done before that hour was up. And I did discover, it's like you said, you discover your gifts sometimes that you didn't even know that you could do something until you try it and say, oh, well, I can do this. And so I sat there and I wrote every morning. I would write something. And in no time flat, it was like less than a month or so, I had enough songs for a brand new album. And that album is now called Beautiful Thoughts. And it's one of my favorite albums of all the albums I've done. It has, I think, 14 or 15 songs on there. And the album's title is Beautiful Thoughts. And all that came about from my, she would say, don't say this on the air. I say, but she called it the Bob technique, B-O-B, but on the bench. So I put my behind on the bench and wrote my music. That was the Bob technique. So,
right. Well, a lot of authors say that same thing, that if you want to write a book, you just have to sit in the chair and write it. And I was I wrote my first novel. I think I started it it took me 7 years. So 2010. And I published it in 2017. But after I finished in 2014, after I finished the rough draft, so it took me a long time to organize it and edit it and cut it down and rearrange it. But in 2014, when I finished the rough draft, I started the sequel book. And I've only envisioned 2 books in that genre. And so with those characters. And so I was writing away because it has 2 timelines, one in the past, and Morgan in the past becomes involved in the suffrage movement. Well, there's a lot to write about that.
sure.
But in 2014, there wasn't very much to write for Jenna in the present. And so it kind of stalled for a while until the Harvey Weinstein thing happened. And then I started writing on that, and then I got quite a bit written, and then COVID happened, and it was like, oh, now what? So I kind of got stalled a few times on the present. But really what I just needed to do was sit down, and I've started to do that now, is sit down every day and just work on it for a little bit. And mostly right now, what I'm doing is just rearranging the storyline in the present. I'm just rearranging the parts that I've already written, but I am going to have to fill in the blanks and things. But that's right. You just have to, if you're going to paint a painting, you have to get the paints out and you have to start painting.
You got to have some paint on a palette and a paintbrush and get to it.
Exactly. Or pastels or a pencil and paper or whatever it is.
Yeah.
And my husband is a visual artist. He started a pottery studio in Sierra Vista, but he works for the city and he's the graphic artist for the city. And when they moved him over to City Hall, they effectively separated him from the pottery studio that he started. So he was grieving about that, but he also has been using a Macintosh since the mid 80s and for his graphic stuff. And so when he comes home, he's creating stuff on the computer. And he follows a lot of podcasts about the Mac and Apple and, different things that you can do with it. And so he is being creative, and, you got to do that every day. You have to do, or almost every day. And that's the part that I was resisting for a while, was, I don't know. I have no idea what to write. But if you're not sitting down, trying stuff out, it's not going to work.
I've been doing a lot of reading about the creativity process. There's a fellow named Dr. Stephen Porges, who's a renowned doctor who studied the vagus nerve, which is kind of the, if you've ever studied that, but there's everything that controls your body kind of goes through this vagus nerve. And he is the world expert, probably the premier expert in all things about the vagus nerve. And he's written a wonderful book called Polyvagal Safety is the name of the book, but he is the creator of this polyvagal theory. And it is a fascinating theory, and it's such a connected theory of behavior and your reactions and your involuntary nervous system versus the voluntary. And this idea of creativity and how, like, for example, I am a very analytical person, which I guess you call that left brain. So I am a left brain dominated person. I think analytically. I'm a computer programmer. I love, I'm like your husband. We've owned every Macintosh since the very beginning as well. I love computers and technology. My whole formal career with AT&T was all about technology. So that's me on that side. So maybe that's why it took me 33 years to get off of that side of the brain over to the right side to write a song, because creativity is normally thought of as just a right brain function.
Mm-hmm.
So I have to get myself out of my left brain analytical side. When I'm sitting at the piano, I don't need to be thinking about analyzing the notes I'm playing.
Mm-hmm.
What I need to be doing is listening to the sounds that the notes are making in the piano, and just basically letting my right brain take over
Mm-hmm.
and create from that. And so how I get myself from a left brain state of mind into a creative right brain state of mind is something I'm still working on. How do I do that? There's got to be triggers, and I think my triggers are sitting at the piano and I hear I'll just sometimes sit down and just play a C chord and just listen.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's something about that sound that when my brain hears that sound, it says, okay, I think it might be time to get into the creative mode.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm really working on that, and I'm looking forward to it. I'm going to be speaking in person to Dr. Porges in about a week and a half. I've made connections with him, and he and I are going to do a Zoom call, and I'm so looking forward to that, because he's just the world-renowned expert, and I'm so honored that he would take the time to talk with me. But I want to talk with him about this creative side of the vagus nerve and how it controls your thoughts and your involuntary responses. Because really, I think this, like you said, when you sit down and start writing, when you getting into your writing mode, if you want to think of it that way, as your mental process, is probably pretty much an involuntary response to something. And it's probably the response to you sitting there at the keyboard or your typewriter or whatever it is that you're doing. And that physical act of writing moves you into that mode.
Mm-hmm. Yes,
and
I
it's
think
the
you're
same
right.
for me with my music. It's sitting at the piano moves me into the mode of creating music.
Yeah, because I'm a theater artist too. I teach theater at the community college, but before that, I got 2 degrees in theater. I worked in the theater. I was in plays. I stage managed. I worked backstage. I made costumes. I did all this stuff. And being in the theater, there is a certain process that you have to go through to get the play to final production, and you have to go through all the steps. And so in a way, I think that's what creativity is. You get used to the steps that you have to go through to create whatever it is. So if you're making a movie, you have to do all the pre-production. I've talked to movie makers too. You have to have a script. You have to go through the pre-production planning, how the shots are going to be made, and blah, 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 blah. And then finally you cast it and you start filming. But the actors get the script. They have a process too. They get the script. They have to read it more than once. They have to analyze their character. What are their character's motivations? What are their intentions? What is it they want from the other people in the play? That kind of stuff. And then you start the rehearsals, and then you discover more things. You and the director and the other actors discover more things, deeper layers of the meaning of the play. So what you are describing is you sitting down and just putting your hands on the keyboard is like a little, like you said, it's a click in your head that says, oh, okay, I'm in a new mode of thinking. And I never thought of it like that before, but I love that idea. That,
there are triggers that we don't even know. It's like, we've all heard of the sad stories of PTSD. Well, PTSD is largely triggered by some traumatic event in someone's life. And it could be for somebody in a war, for example, it could be the sound of a gunshot. Well, as soon as they hear a loud pop, whether it's even a backfiring of a car or a real gunshot or not, it can trigger that thought and take you right back. And for people with PTSD, it is so powerful. They are almost literally taken back to the event when they first experienced that.
Yeah.
And so there are triggers in our environment that cause us to go into certain mental states and modes and whatever. And I think that as the more we study that, and if you're in the creative process, whether you're a painter or a sculptor or a writer or a musician, you need to discover what is it that triggers you to get into that mode, so that you don't have to sit there all day long and hope you stumble on it. You need to get into that mode quickly. It's an efficiency process for you. So for you, if it's writing, for a writer, get out the laptop, sit down in your favorite writing place, turn on the favorite lights for writing. And if you have to listen to some pretty music while you're writing, turn that on and put your fingers on the keyboard and just start writing something. And you probably find yourself finally getting lost in what you're writing, and then you're in the mode, and then you just go with it.
Right. Yeah. I do think that just sitting there looking at the white page and then maybe the cursor flashing is not a bad thing.
Right.
It could be a good thing. But when I'm writing my blog, I usually get a little bit of an idea, and this usually happens just as I'm waking up in the morning. I get a little bit of an idea of what I'm going to write for that week's blog post. And then a few days before, and then I'm thinking about it in the back of my head. I call it on the back burner of my mind, thinking about it. And then when I sit down to the white page with the cursor, it's a little easier. Now, some are, of course, are harder to write than others, but I already have a little bit of an idea of what I want to write about. And it comes to me, just as I'm waking up usually in the morning. I don't know why that is. Or when I used to. What?
Well, I was going to say it's probably because, and it has the same thing for me. If I have a problem I'm trying to solve, I'll define the problem exactly what I want to solve, go to bed and go to sleep. And even when I was a math major in college, working on homework that had really complicated math problems to solve, and I couldn't solve it right on the spot, I'd read the problem, get it all in my mind, go take a nap, go to sleep. And most of the time when I woke up, I had the answer. And it's really, I believe, your subconscious mind takes all this into account, and it organizes and reorganizes all your thoughts and stuff while you're asleep. So like you said, when you wake up, it's clear. Oh, this is what I need to write about. I've been thinking about it, and now it's clear.
Yeah. The other time is when I'm driving. I used to teach in Douglas, Arizona, which is a border town, and it's an hour from our house. So I would have an hour of driving time. And, you can have a little part of your mind doing something while you're driving, while you're paying attention to the road. There wasn't that much traffic between here and Douglas. But so sometimes I would get ideas. I would get ideas for if I was directing a play and we were having a problem with it, I'd get an idea of how to solve that problem, or, those kinds of things for school. But also when I started writing, driving was a good time to do it. And what you say about sleeping, I think is, or just disconnecting from the problem, whatever you think the problem is, I think is really, really a good, you're right. That's a good analogy and a good way to do it for yourself. This is a really silly situation, but last weekend, the pump, we have a well, and there are 5 houses on the well. Well, we woke up Saturday morning. Barry had just come back from his walk, and he's washing his hands at the sink and no water. So something had happened to the pump. Well, all weekend we went without. Barry went to town. He bought a whole bunches of water and filled up water jugs and stuff and brought them home. And then Monday morning, which is when the people were going to come look at the pump, he woke up he said, I had a dream and I remembered that when we had this problem before, the ants get into the contacts and short it out. And he said, so I think maybe that's what happened. So he went down with some sandpaper, checked, and that's sure enough, that's what happened. Ants had gotten into the contact. So he sanded it and the pump started working again.
Good for him. All right.
And it's funny because I had thought of that earlier in the week, but I thought, oh, I don't know anything about pumps, but I had remembered the whole ant incident. And I didn't say anything to him. I should have said something because we could have had water earlier in the weekend. But
yeah,
so
your neighbors would have been happy that you suggested that.
Yes. But yeah, so it's true. But I think sometimes we just get our minds all twisted in a knot. And we think that we can't do this, or our thoughts are so powerful that we think we have these beliefs, this whole set of belief systems. Oh, I can't be a writer. I can't be whatever it is, a musician. And we stop ourselves from being creative.
It's so important when you are in that kind of that particular stage, when you first created something, to surround yourself with people who will support you and give you positive energy and feedback about what you've created. Not the people that say, well, you can't do anything with that, or, all the naysayers, but you need to surround yourself with the positive team of people that will support what you're trying to accomplish. If you're a writer, surround yourself with, find a great editor, somebody that's going to help, move your book forward, talk to other authors who've been there and done that, and that will help you move you along. But don't let people talk you out of anything. Don't let somebody steal your dream.
Right. I love what Brené Brown wrote in Daring Greatly. She wrote a book called Daring Greatly. And she, at the beginning, she has this quote by Teddy Roosevelt, something about, I'm not going to say the quote correctly, but if you are in the arena, if you are getting bloody and dirty and you're trying, and then someone comes along and criticizes you for that, and they're not in the arena trying, then don't listen to them. They don't know what they're talking about.
Right.
It's, if you are trying that, you're daring greatly, and you are at least accomplishing something of value. That's kind of what the whole quote means. And the naysayers, the people on social media who are so nasty, well, have you tried it? Have you tried to create something? Don't criticize if you haven't tried to create something, don't criticize. So
that's right.
Yeah.
One of my favorite things that that was also I've heard from Jack Canfield over and over, and that is the word action. You have to take action. When you have an idea, a product, a service, or something that you're trying to move forward, whether, like in your case, you're trying to put together a play or anything that you're creating, you got to take action. You can't sit and think about it all day long. You've got to move forward and take some action. Like in my case, I was always encouraged to take action. My wife is the great encourager in our family. She just absolutely is unbelievably encouraging. And so if she has an idea about something, she's going to be persistent enough to where eventually I will take the action and make it happen. So, but the key is to take the action. Like if I had to sit and put my sheet of music in my piano bench and never done anything with it, that would have been a crime to just left that alone.
Yeah.
So getting it named, getting it recorded, getting it the album recorded, get it put on the radio, getting it played and sold through gift shops all over the country, all those things, you had to take action to make something happen. Even today, you got to take action to put things on the internet. You can't, it won't go straight from, you can't read your mind and go from your laptop right on to YouTube or any other social media on its own. You've got to take action to make it happen. You've got to create a podcast. You got to put that podcast out there, and all the platforms that will take it, and then you've got to find ways to let your potential audience know that it's there, and they can go listen to it or watch it. So you have to take action.
Yeah. But on the other hand, I was talking to Ivan Bodley last year. He's a bass player and has played for lots of Motown. He's kind of I think he's like a substitute, but he knows a lot of people from the Motown bands and stuff. And he said he and some other musicians, I mean, he does also have a band of his own, and he does like bar mitzvahs, weddings, small concerts, stuff like that around New York. But he said one night he and some musicians were at this bar, and it was like 2:00 in the morning, and they were just jamming and playing. And, he looked at his friend and said, I'm not sure this is really I don't think we're doing very much here. I don't think it's very important. And she said, oh, yes, it is. Even though there are only 20 people here listening to us, we are creating community. So, even if you're only if only you had played your song at church, or, only a few other people started playing your song, it would have been important. But for you, you were just following a natural progression of something, and it did go viral. But not everybody's going to have their thing go viral. It doesn't mean it's not important.
Right.
The creative process is the thing that's important to me. That's what I
and you never know. All it takes sometimes is for something to land on one person, a key person's ears. You may have an audience of one, but if that one person could be the key to a tremendous next step that takes place, you just never know.
Right. So it's, to me, I love that you go and sit down at the piano and just play every night. And that's how it all started, because you were just being creative. You were just, you were connecting with the music. It was something that meant something to you. And I've just come to that recently, that I need to focus on the creative process. And yes, I do the social media component and stuff, but I don't concentrate on getting 1 million listeners from my podcast. What I do is I concentrate on the people that I'm talking to for the podcast. And then when I'm writing, I concentrate on writing the book for myself. What am I trying to say to myself? And then we'll see, we'll see who it touches. So, I've enjoyed this so much. Do you have anything else you want to say?
Well, I'm sure we could talk all afternoon, but I'm sure you have other things to do today, and so do I. But this has been a real pleasure to talk with you and just sit and just have a little fireside chat here, so to speak, about music and writing and thinking and creating all kinds of things. It's been fun.
Well, yes, it has been fun. So thank you so much.
Well, thank you, Lucinda, for inviting me to come on with you. And this has been a fun way to spend a few minutes today. And I hope that your listeners and your viewers enjoyed it as much as I did. Yes,
and I will put the link to your website where they can access your music.
Great. Well, they can't, if they can remember my last name, they can usually find me. It's at combsmusic.com. It's simple to remember. So
yes,
that's all they need to remember.
That's great. Well, enjoy your next creative project.
Well, same to you and your writing and your producing of your podcast. I hope you are succeeding beyond your imagination.
Well, I'm having fun. So that's success to me.
That's great.
Before I go, I'd like to give a big shout out to Podmatch, which I call a dating service for podcasters. Since I joined their platform, I have met so many wonderful people from all over the world, and they make the matches so easy that if you are a podcaster or you have a message that you want to share, you might want to consider checking them out. The affiliate link is at the bottom of my show notes on my website at Sage-Woman Chronicles at sagewoman.life. Part of what I love about them is that they promote civil conversations, and can't we use that right now? So if you check them out, tell them Lucinda sent you. I'd also like to invite you to my Patreon community, where we will have chats with authors or creators. We'll have member chats about the stories that they love, and occasionally we'll have extra episodes or uncut episodes of Story Power. So please go check out my Patreon page at patreon.com/storypower without the hyphen, all one word. I hope you enjoyed the show. If you like what you heard, please share it with a friend and give us a review on your favorite podcast app. It will help people find us. You'll find the show notes for this episode at my website, Sage-Woman Chronicles at sagewoman.life. You can leave a comment there. And remember, as Philip Pullman said, after nourishment, shelter, and companionship, stories are the thing we need most in the world. Until next time, this is Lucinda Sage-Midgorden. Thanks for listening.